Hello, I'm the Doctor, and welcome to DoctorGeek. It's been a pretty crazy 2 weeks in the Doctor Who fandom, with Whovians split into two distinct camps. Those who love the new direction that the show has taken, and those who are incredibly upset at the changes to Doctor Who lore and canon. And honestly, this video is not meant to change anyone's mind on the matter. But after having many discussions in the Doctor Who community over the last few days, I think it's important that I get my thoughts out while they're still fresh. And maybe I can help some of the people who don't understand where the criticism is coming from. But I do want to stress that if you are still loving Doctor Who, that's awesome. And I am so glad that you are still able to enjoy the show as always. However, it's important to understand that not everyone feels that way. Now, for the purposes of this video, I will not be going into any of the plot-specific complaints that I had about the finale outside of the large revelations. But if you're interested in hearing my thoughts on the finale, you can check out my episode review. Instead, this video will focus on the reveal of the Doctor as the Timeless Child, as well as the destruction of Gallifrey, and everything that is affected by these revelations. So, with that said, let's dive in. First off, the decision to destroy Gallifrey alone is worthy of its own video, as it was such a slap in the face to so much of what was accomplished in the 50th anniversary special, and it really makes everything in that episode seem pointless. Remember what the curator said to the 11th Doctor at the end of that episode? Gallifrey falls no more. No more. In fact, 11 is so pleased by this information that he makes it his life's goal to find his home again, the long way round. Finally culminating in the 12th Doctor walking up to the Citadel angrier than he's ever been and hell-bent. It was a fantastic arc with a great payoff, and finally the Time Lords were back in the fray and ready to start messing with the Doctor all over again. But instead, Chibnall literally burns it to the ground, killing every single Time Lord, which is something that not even the Daleks could do. And to make matters worse, he does it while at the same time throwing away all of the character development that was achieved with the Master just 2 series ago. With one decision, he makes an entire series worth of Doctor Who essentially pointless. And that alone is enough to piss the fans off. But honestly, if you had destroyed Gallifrey 5 seasons from now, maybe you could have gotten a couple of fans to go along with it. But doing it so soon and in such a jarring way really does a disservice to everything that we've seen come before it. But of course, this decision is small compared to what comes next. The Timeless Child. The most important person in the history of the Time Lords. And the source of so many plot holes, inconsistencies, and terrible rationalizations that it makes my head spin. Honestly, at this point, the best way to go about doing this is to just go through them one by one, top 10 style, in no particular order, so here we go. Number 1, Testimony. In the final episode of the 12th Doctor, we are introduced to Testimony, a gigantic supercomputer database of every person who has ever lived, including the Doctor and his many lives, and even his different names. But nowhere in that database, and in any of the images that were shown to him, do we see any of the pre-Hartnell Doctors. You'd think that if someone was going around time and space in a police box calling themselves the Doctor, it would have popped up on their radar. Especially if they were, a fugitive of the Judoon. And yet neither the Ruth Doctor nor any of the other pre-Hartnell Doctors are anywhere to be seen. How can this be? Speaking of Ruth, or the fugitive Doctor, that brings us to 2. Who is Ruth? Based on everything that we know about Ruth, the show seems to be telling us that the fugitive Doctor is one of the Doctor's previous regenerations before she was forced back to a child. Which makes sense considering everything that we've just learned. But if this is the case, then how can she have a police box TARDIS? And even more to the point, why is she calling herself the Doctor? As many fans know, the Doctor and his granddaughter Susan stole a TARDIS and traveled the universe in it for a while, visiting different planets and time periods before they arrived on Earth. And only once they arrived in the 1960s in London did the chameleon circuit break and the TARDIS remained a police box. So there is no way that Ruth could have a police box TARDIS unless you want to create an insanely convoluted backstory where the TARDIS knew that it was a police box, but then still took a while to become one again. It's just nonsense. And when you add to that the widely held belief that the Doctor wasn't even calling himself the Doctor until Ian and Barbara came along, and you wind up with a very large plot hole that the show doesn't seem even remotely interested in fixing. It's possible that we will get some clarification on this in the next episode, but honestly, I'm not holding my breath. 3. The Doctor has two hearts. As we all know, the Doctor has two hearts, as do all of the Time Lords and Shobogans. Yet how can this be if the Doctor is not a Time Lord? Are you telling me that the Timeless Child and the Gallifreyans both have two hearts? Because that's an awfully big coincidence if you ask me. And if you're telling me that the Time Lords get their two hearts at the same time that they get their regenerations from the Timeless Child DNA, which would be stupid by the way, but assuming that that's the case, then why do the Shobogans, who are not yet Time Lords, also have two hearts? This inconsistency alone is enough to drive people crazy. In fact, it is the first thing that my girlfriend said after watching the episode, and she is the mildest of Doctor Who fans. If she picked up on this, it's a glaringly obvious inconsistency that doesn't make sense. And speaking of this wonderful Timeless Child DNA, 4. River's regenerations. Now, up until now, we have been under the belief that River is a Time Lady because she was conceived on the TARDIS, while it was traveling through the time vortex. Cool. Makes sense to me. And it made sense to pretty much everyone else who watched the show. But now, the time vortex has nothing to do with regenerations. So how could River have gotten her regenerations from traveling through the time vortex? Now sure, some people will say that the Silence experimented on River to help her get to that point, but it's up for debate as to if she could have already regenerated before their meddling. But I think we can all agree that the Silence was not in possession of Timeless Child DNA. So if that's what's required to get regenerations, then how is it possible that River can regenerate like a Time Lord? It doesn't make sense. In fact, this detail opens up an even larger plot hole. 5. The origin of regenerations. As I just said, we learn that the Timeless Child had her DNA spliced into the genetic code of the Shobogans, giving them the ability to regenerate, and that in turn led to the Shobogans discovering time travel. In fact, in the Master's exposition dump, he yada yadas over the discovery of time travel like it's nothing. Yet the Time Lords don't name themselves after their regeneration ability. They are not the Regeneration Lords. They name themselves after time travel, which up until now made perfect sense, because we learned that the Time Lords got the ability to regenerate from being exposed to the time vortex, and we were all very happy with that explanation. Now, some people like to justify this by saying that maybe the Timeless Child was exposed to the time vortex, and that is what caused her regenerations. But since this episode tells us that you apparently need regenerations to discover time travel, then there would be no way to become exposed to the time vortex without first getting the ability to regenerate, which then cannot be caused by exposure to the time vortex. The whole timeline is out of order, and something that once made perfect sense is now thrown into chaos. 6. The Morbius Doctors. Now, when some fans saw the finale, they rejoiced, because to them, the Timeless Child fixes what they consider to be a plot hole from the Morbius episode, when the Doctor is confronted by faces that at the time, the showrunners considered to be his past incarnations. However, it is never explicitly said that that is the case, and every showrunner since that episode did not consider that to be the case, and subsequently took steps to establish that the Doctor began with William Hartnell. even so recently as Peter Capaldi's last episode. So, many fans have simply made the logical assumption that those faces came from Morbius, who was also a Time Lord, and thus also had past incarnations. Makes sense, right? But now, if those faces are the Doctor, it opens up even more plot holes. For one, how could those faces even appear if the Doctor himself didn't remember them? And even if the machine that they were using was pulling memories that the Doctor didn't even know he had, which is not what the machine was supposed to do, but assuming that it did, why did the Doctor not immediately go to Gallifrey to try and figure out who those faces were? Surely he must have been confused at seeing faces that he didn't recognize, especially if the assumption was that they did not belong to Morbius. So why wasn't the timeless child discovered at that point? Was the Doctor not curious as to why he was seeing previous incarnations that he wasn't aware of? Clearly not. So, this again makes no sense. Which then brings us to 7. The Valeyard's motivation. Speaking of retconning classic episodes, the Timeless Child effectively makes the Valeyard completely pointless. For those of you who don't know, the Valeyard is an evil version of the Doctor from somewhere between his 12th and final regeneration. And since we have not yet seen him appear, he must come after the 13th Doctor. However, the entire point of the Valeyard was that he was trying to steal the 6th Doctor's unused regenerations for himself. But if the Valeyard comes after 13, then he should know that he can regenerate endlessly, so there's no point in him trying to steal more. So way to waste a fantastic character that many fans would have loved to see come back. 8. The Matrix. So, Series 12 has us believe that the Master was just looking around in the Matrix for anything he could find when he stumbled onto the Timeless Child. And honestly, this is probably one of the dumbest parts of this whole controversy. You're telling us that the Master, who wasn't even looking for anything in particular, came across this terrible, horrible, no-good secret of the Time Lords by complete chance? Something that no other Time Lord, even the ones responsible for the Matrix, had ever found? I mean, in Hell-Bent, we learned that the Doctor was once trapped inside the Matrix as a young man, and he never found anything. And even if you want to believe that maybe the information was really hard to find, why was most of it redacted, but not all of it? I mean, why have any information in the Matrix at all about the Timeless Child, when you could just erase it forever and no one would need to know? Why were some of the Brendan memories in the Matrix as real memories if the entire point was to make them look like boring memories? In fact, why even let the Doctor live at all? Surely killing the Doctor would make far more sense than allowing them to grow up in a completely different life with this terrible looming secret inside. I'm pretty sure that if the Time Lords wanted to keep this a secret, they could have done so far more easily. It seems very unlike them. Unless they couldn't kill the Doctor, which brings us to our next point. 9. The Doctor is basically immortal now. Now that we know that the Doctor has an innate genetic ability to regenerate seemingly forever, is there anything that she can't do? Obviously, the Doctor has always been a bit immortal, but knowing that they could only regenerate 12 times really made every regeneration feel sad, like watching the days count down until you die. But now, the Doctor has an unlimited source of regeneration energy, taking all of the suspense out of if she will get through a situation. Honestly, at this point, they could kill the Doctor twice in one episode, and who cares? 2 down, 1.5 million to go. There's no end, so there's no emotional impact. And that's not even considering the fact that the Doctor has given her regeneration energy to people before to heal them, like with River and with Davros. So now that she has unlimited energy, she should be able to heal anyone at any point in time. And if she doesn't, that's a massive plot hole. The Doctor is now literally the Doctor. So look forward to no one ever getting hurt from now on. And then of course you have the destructive power of the regeneration energy, as we have seen it destroy the TARDIS multiple times, as well as an entire fleet of Daleks. Can the Doctor now call forth this mighty energy whenever there's an unbeatable foe? Is this her new Megazord form? Because if she doesn't, then it's a plot hole. The Doctor is now a superhero with god powers. She can't die, she can't be beaten, and she can even heal the wounded. Awesome. Which brings us to our final, number 10. The Doctor is no longer the Doctor. The show is called Doctor Who. It's a question. The question is a part of the show. If that question were ever answered, then Doctor Who would not be a very good name for the show. The mystery is part of the fun. Who is the Doctor? What is his or her name? We don't know, because we don't need to know. Why does she go around the universe helping people? Why is she so different from the Time Lords? How were the Time Lords created? We don't know. And honestly, I don't think any real fans really wanted to know. Over the years, some things have been explained, but others have been reasonably kept in the realm of things that we really shouldn't fuck around with. And that encompasses anything that came before William Hartnell. We don't need to know. And not knowing adds to the mystery of the show, and it allows us to form our own ideas, opinions, and theories. Don't like someone's theory? Make up your own. No harm, no foul. In fact, every single showrunner in the history of Doctor Who understood that fact, that nothing that they could come up with would ever come close to being as satisfying as the enduring mystery behind it all. So they never tried to write something to change that. But then, Chris Chibnall came along and thought, you know what? I think I'm going to be the one to announce once and for all how the Time Lords came to be and who the Doctor really is. And if the fans don't like it, well then they're just not real fans. And just like that, Chibnall became the decider on the origins of a show that he was in charge of for a blip in time, condemning anyone who comes after him to accept it. And he didn't even have the common courtesy to make the origins something that we could all get behind. Instead, he decided that the Time Lords actually became who they were by murdering a child over and over again. He decided that the Doctor is the timeless child, and she is Space Jesus from another universe with godlike powers. Doctor Who? That question has been answered. The timeless child. That's who. The show's name is now The Timeless Child. It has become Doctor What? Doctor Where is she from? Doctor What is she? More questions that I don't want answered. But the damage has already been done. The Doctor is no longer a Time Lord, and she goes on missions around the universe because that's what she did for the Time Lords before her mind was erased. She's special, not because of who she is, but because of her genetics. Her and the Master, they're no longer equals, no longer the perfect foil for each other. The Doctor is and has always been the better. And she even brags about it to him. Brags about her genetic superiority to the first non-white Master. The mystery is gone, and it comes at the expense of depriving William Hartnell of his first Doctor status, something that he treasured until the day he died. No longer is that delightful man the Doctor's origin, his base level. Instead, he was replaced by a young girl who was tortured over and over again. Awesome. And you know what the worst part is? The show makes a point of telling you how none of this matters. The Doctor is still the Doctor. Her origins do not define her. This revelation does not change who she is. Which is great. It's a great message. But if that's the case, then all that you have done was for nothing. You've pissed off the fans, destroyed the canon, ruined the legacy of William Hartnell, all for nothing, just to rile things up and to get some headlines. You were given a 57-year-old show and you decided to run it off the rails and then yelled at us when we didn't like the off-roading. Now, to those of you who say that people have been complaining about Doctor Who since episode 2, you may be right. But no controversy has ever been this jarring, or retconned more of the show. Some people say that the Doctor wasn't even originally a Time Lord, or didn't originally have two hearts, or couldn't regenerate originally, or that the Daleks had their origin story slightly changed. But to that I would say that changing by addition is more than okay. That's how you add to a show, by creating things that weren't originally there. But when you create by subtraction, that's where you get into trouble. The Doctor is not a Time Lord. William Hartnell was not the first Doctor. The Master is not the Doctor's equal. Rassilon and Omega are not the most important people in Time Lord history. Taking things away pisses people off. And while the Doctor was once the best of her race, acting for the good of the less fortunate, while other members of her people stood idly by, the Doctor is now some unknown entity, destined to be different, fulfilling a destiny that she has always had. And I don't understand how you can see that as anything other than being boring and contrived. The Doctor was special because of her ideals. Now it's because of her genetics. No longer self-made, she is defined by her origins and her abuse. The Doctor is kind, brave, and cares for everyone, big or small. Never cruel, never cowardly. This basic understanding of the character has been consistent for over 57 years. And while the Doctor's appearances and personality may change, her principles always stayed the same. And as long as the show delivered an exciting adventure based around that basic idea, it could do no wrong. Sure, you might not like a specific enemy or plot point, but at the end of the day, the Doctor was the Doctor, and he or she would be on to a new adventure the very next week. But the Doctor is the Doctor no longer. She is the timeless child. She is not a Time Lord, she is an other. She's not from Gallifrey, she's from a portal. She's not the best of her race, she's the only one of her race. She's not in her 14th form, she's immortal. She did not start with William Hartnell, she is origin-less. She did not steal a TARDIS, she found one she already had. And it didn't get stuck as a police box, it reverted to it. If you like these changes, I'm honestly happy for you. But for me, who has seen every episode of this show more times than I can count, and who loves the history of the show more than anything, I am personally crushed by this. Crushed by the destruction of the show's lore. And while I will continue to watch and make content about Doctor Who, I do it out of my love for the show that once was, not what it has become. And with that, I thank you for being my companions on this journey today, and here's hoping that there will be more journeys to come. I'm the Doctor. Bye for now.